Hi, everyone. My name is Adoma Champong. I am the program manager at NIA Center for the Arts. For those who don't know, NIA Center for the Arts is a Black arts organization that promotes, showcases, and supports an appreciation for the arts from across the African diaspora. That looks like everything from artist residencies, youth mentorship, one-on-one consulting with artists, having a beautiful space over at 524 Oakwood where a community can come and convene and create and showcase while also holding sessions like this, whether they be virtual or in person. I'm so pleased to be, here right now with Neil, Michael, and Chantaie, who are three fantastic folks who work in industry, particularly in advertising. And they're here to share a little bit about what their day-to-day looks like, how they got into the roles, why these roles are important, and how they contribute to the entire ecosystem of advertising, from concept to seeing something on Instagram or on a billboard, but then also talk about their experiences being Black and in the roles that they're in. They are often the minority, and the title of this session is called Too Few for Too Long, because there are too few of them, and it has been that way for too long. So we're hoping to, of course, increase numbers and see better representation across all industries, and with the help of Neil, Michael, and Chantaie, we're going to try and do that for you. So I will just have my lovely panelists introduce themselves. We'll begin with you, Neil, then we're going to go to Michael, and then we're going to go to Chantaie. Please tell us your name, your pronouns, a little bit about you, where viewers at home can follow you, whether it be on Instagram, your website, where they can see your work, maybe previous work or current work, and just fill in the gaps on who Neil is.
Yeah, so my name is Neil Owusu, pronouns is his and him. My role is head of production at Grey Toronto, and that really does entail sort of like managing the production department at the agency. Been in the game for about 13 plus years now. So I have my role, but what my actual sort of competency is producer. I just happen to now manage the production department, but I've been producing for that period of time. Started in a digital medium space, doing like autumn banners that you got blocked, and then sort of worked my way out to all mediums. So that's sort of like broadcast video, radio, photo shoots, print, the whole thing. And then I've worked at a ton of different agencies and sort of like been able to really like get a good experience in terms of all different sectors. And it's kind of led me to this point. I do like to go. I do enjoy a little bit of Twitter here and there. So you can follow me at Neil_that_dude. And then if you're curious about sort of work that I've done in my portfolio and stuff like that, of course, LinkedIn is kind of where we sort of all hang out as professionals. But Neil Owusu, NEALOWUSU.com is another place where I try to keep my kind of most fun, most exciting portfolio of work. So you can see kind of things that I've produced over my period of time.
Okay, cool. And so, Michael, if you can go ahead and introduce yourself for our viewers at home, tell us about who you are as a person, as a creative, where we can find your work, fill in the blanks for us.
Okay, awesome. I'm Michael Brathwaite. That's he, his, him. I'm an account director at an ad agency. I've been in client services now, as they call it in the ad world, for about just over a decade. So my role is typically involving servicing the client. So that means really managing and measuring their expectations, but also similarly internally as well. So managing and measuring the team and really delivering projects as best as possible. I really say that what I do is problem solving by influencing the storytelling of the creative. And that influence could be through small things, big things. Sometimes just a simple look could be a good influence, but sometimes you need to dive into a bit more of deeper details and be able to communicate that. So I really don't have a portfolio as a client servicing person. That's not typical. But I do You can catch me on LinkedIn. I'm relatively active there and a member of a few groups. And yeah, so that would be the best place to catch me, I think.
Nice. Nice. So it looks like you do a lot of like interpersonal work, working with clients
Yeah.
one-on-one basis, reading people, working with people, and getting the job done on that front.
Yeah, I think my role is interesting because I don't necessarily think there are many hard skills you can develop for being a client servicing person. You really need to be personable, you need to be approachable, you need to have good communication skills. And these are all soft skills that you develop throughout life. So I think it's about how quickly you can kind of bring these on side and get that together to kind of get into the role that I'm in right now. But yeah, and it's interesting because you learn a lot every day in my role. I'm not an expertise in anything, and it's weird, but I'm the person who connects everything. So I need to have a certain level of understanding and appreciation of what other people do to really be able to deliver anything that's above board or actually adequate or best to market. So it's fun. It's always a challenge, but always an opportunity. So that's a lot of fun, I think.
Nice. I'm looking forward to like unpacking, the different elements of your role. But Chantaie, last but most certainly not least, please tell us about yourself, what you do on a day-to-day, and fill in those blanks for our viewers watching at home.
For sure. So, hi, my name is Chantaie. I am what you would call a strategist. I started out as a creative strategist in the advertising world. I've evolved in that role into a number of different places, primarily as a researcher, as a strategic planner is the traditional term in advertising, and the role people would know most if they're interested in the space. But my expertise is brand strategy, and that grew out of sort of being able to be in this role and work with different brands and work with different clients and help them build their own brand. So I'm a strategic planner, but mostly I'm a brand strategist, which means I work with different clients. I work with creative folks, especially designers in a brand strategy role, to help our clients bring their brands to life, bring their businesses to life, and connect and engage with their consumers. So I do all of the thinking up front before it goes to a creative team or a designer or creative person who then goes and brings that thinking to life in a way that makes sense and is inspiring. You can find me in a number of places on the internet. I started out as a journalist and then moved into this space. So I consider myself mostly a storyteller, and I happen to tell brand stories right now. The best place to like learn from me and work with me and all of those things and understand more of what I do is to follow my newsletter or sign up for my newsletter. It's adventuresinstorytelling.substack.com. But you can also find me on LinkedIn. If you are a Black woman, I will always accept the invitation to connect, and I will always do all I can to connect you to folks in the industry. And having worked in it for a number of years, I have a network that I'm willing to share with you. So please do feel free to reach out.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I also love anyone with a newsletter. Like, I'm very old school in that sense. Like, newsletter, like, how do I subscribe? Can't wait. I'm sure the link will be below somewhere. And so, yeah, I think we'll start with you particularly because I think it's an interesting role, strategist. Like, you hear strategists like in political circles, you hear it in finance circles, and so in creative industries, I think a lot of people will be interested in what your day-to-day looks like, and particularly how you contribute to the ecosystem of advertising as a whole. Like, how do you play with others? How does your role support others? And what roles do you look to support the work that you're doing?
Right. So a strategy director is somebody, and that was my title last I worked in advertising, is somebody who works closely with the client early on in the process and works closely with the account director, so Michael or folks on his team, to understand the business problem that the client is trying to solve. Really unpack that. And often a client will come with like, we want an ad for something, but there's a problem that they're trying to solve. And sometimes they know it, sometimes they don't. So my job is to work with them to identify the problem and then identify the opportunity in terms of what marketing can do and what advertising can do and what creative can do to solve that problem, and really get us as a team focused on the thing that makes the most sense. Usually how that comes to life is by writing a creative brief that sort of outlines the problem and outlines, based on my research, my exploration, conversations with customers potentially, outline the best way in to solving the problem. And so that's not, it's a creative exercise, at least in my opinion, it's a creative exercise. But then the sort of the work of the creative team comes in, because they take that creative brief, they take that sort of assignment, they take the understanding and the insight that hopefully, if I've done my job right, I've pulled out of it, and they bring that to life creatively, either in an ad, in like some piece of content, depending on who the team is and what the channel plan is. And that's the other thing. If clients are smart and wonderful and brilliant, they'll come to us without channels in mind, and they'll come with the problem so that we can work with them to identify the best places to sort of work to engage the customer and consumer with knowledge about the product or idea or whatever it is we're trying to sell.
Nice. So you're kind of like point one in a series of many points. Well, not point one, but like you come in at the earlier stages to help unpack that problem, figure out what the problem is, and help maybe steer the clients in ways that might lead to a successful pursuit down this, advertising or creative journey.
Yeah, I'd say 1.5, because I think the account director or the account person is usually the person who the client talks to first, and then they come to us as strategists, and then like that group works together. And then I get, if I'm lucky, depending on the project, I get a set amount of time where I can go away and like huddle in a corner and do research and figure things out and quote unquote strategize, and then come back, work with the account director, make sure it's clear, and then present that brief to the creative team. Nice.
And so Michael, since if Chantaie is 1.5, I'm assuming you're 1 point something. Tell us about your day-to-day and what it looks like and how you contribute to the ecosystem, maybe in tandem with or outside of roles like strategists and other positions like that.
Yeah, so I would say point one, what they'll call the day-to-day contact with clients. So if the client has a question, they have a potential idea, they see something in market they want to respond to, or that they want to get into market, or there's a business problem that's coming down the pipeline and they're like, hey, this is upcoming. I'm the person to talk to, I'm the person to reach out to. So my role is, at that point, is about really unpacking what the client is trying to answer and unpacking the opportunity within it. Understanding that in a creative agency, there are multiple roles and multiple processes. So you have to really do a good job of matching what the client is asking for the process that needs to be unfolded, needs to be taken. So for example, Chantaie, it's not every project that you need an in-depth strategy exploration. Some projects are just, I need a print ad for this specific thing, and it needs to be talking about this event we're holding. Can you put it together? You don't really need to strategize against that. But some projects, the bigger ones, the ones that have a lot more that I have a lot more appetite for, you really need to think about what the problem really is, because sometimes they may come to you with a problem, but it's not the real problem. And you also then need to think about how you will position the brand to connect that to be the solution for that problem. So to solve the problem, but also solve the problem for the audience. So it's really about circulating all three of those things together and coming up with a plan and a process to make that happen.
Awesome.
So in my day-to-day, it's a mix between a bit of business, a bit of sales, a bit of just having fun, because you also need to be a cheerleader, and also a bit about project management as well, in terms of being able to see the process in front of you and manipulate it so you get what you need out of it.
Okay. Okay. And so outside of, let's say, a strategist, what are some of the roles that you interface with like most regularly on a day-to-day or even like a week-to-week? What are some other roles that you engage with that support your work or you support their work, things like that?
I think it would be everyone in the agency. So typically, my first point of contact in a bigger project would be the strategy team. We would work together to figure out what the problem is, figure out the opportunity, and get to a creative brief. Then writing that brief of the strategy team, we'll bring that to the creative team, which usually comprises of an art director and a copywriter. Essentially someone who's really focused on visuals and someone else who's really focused on the words that we're saying. And we would brief that creative team in, obviously with support from senior creative people. So within their department, there would be someone that they report into that has a lot more experience or years under their belt when it comes to creative development, specifically for advertising. I would see that through the process. So we would work, usually creative development involves sharing high-level thoughts, then constantly whittling that down into a core of an idea and bringing the client along for that journey so they're aligned to everything we're doing. So it would involve back and forth communications with the creative team, checking in to see where they're at, and also providing feedback for the creative that's on the table. And that's really, I think, where a lot of let me rephrase that. That's really where the perspective of the Black experience comes into play when you're reviewing the creative before it hits market or what it could look like. And so we go through that process to help get to a place where the client is in love with what we have and we're in love with what we have on the table. And then the next step would be over to Neil, for example. It would be over to production. And production could involve multiple different types of producers or types of production. Anything from broadcast, which is video, which could be on TV, it could be digital video, it could be on social, as well as print, which is just like old-fashioned print, showing up in multiple mediums from out of home to brochures, what have you. And then also digital, which would be those digital banners that you see on every website. Behind that,
I see them. I don't have an ad blocker, just saying.
I do.
Secretly, most people in the industry do have an ad blocker. But also more complex digital products such as building websites or microsites or apps as well. Sometimes that's the solution for the client's problem. And also social. So really in the impetus when we're starting a project, as we work with the strategy team, we also need to work with, because in the creative world, in advertising, we think about what is to be said and what we will say. Well, the media team, they would think about where it's said and where it shows up. So we usually work very closely with them to understand what channels we will eventually put this creative idea into. And I'm along for that entire process. So up until delivery of the project as well, I'm there for that, and tracking as well, and reconciliation. So my responsibility is the budget. So obviously dialing up and dialing down those opportunities as necessary, as well as the scope and time, because when something happens, I'm the one a client calls. So I need to hold myself accountable for any project that passes on my table. And as in the director role, however, I'm also responsible for the career projections of coordinators or managers that fall under me and reporting to me. So kind of honing their skills to be a better client servicing person. So if, I'll stop there.
And so if Chantaie is 1.5 and Michael is 1, I'm not sure how many points exist on the scale, but Neil, if you could tell us a little bit about where you would fall on this, trajectory, at least within the space here of, Chantaie and Michael. I think Michael kind of gave that away a little bit, but tell us a little bit about, what your day-to-day looks like, how you support this ecosystem of advertising and who you interface with regularly.
Yeah, I think like our role as producer is really sort of, well, it's two-pronged. It's like a reality check, that's key. And then the second is actually like, okay, how do we bring dreams to life? How do we make those things happen? And I think you're kind of looking at the positive and negatives of that. From a number perspective, I think maybe we're 3 or 4. We're at the end though, where we're like, all right, do the thing. So oftentimes what that involves is we have a few prerequisites to make sure the idea is feasible, and feasibility is kind of the name of the game. So as the strategy brief is briefed to creatives, and then Michael is taking sort of shepherding this through to completion. Once the creative is in a really great place, the producer comes in and makes that happen. And that is all dependent on the different mediums, and there's different sort of tactics for each medium. One example, if it's a digital build, that would involve, okay, we need to create a structure that involves UX and then interface design. So how that Facebook layout looks, it's a little bit different from your creative, because the creative sort of conceptualizing Facebook, whereas then you'll hire an interface designer to work through how that sort of user experience looks like, and then development, and then testing, and then deployment, which is different than how you would handle the production process for a broadcast video, which would require sort of structuring the timeline around pre-production, getting the right sort of team, doing a proper estimate presentation, which is essentially just having a presentation with the client saying it's going to cost this much, but it involves pretty structured approach. And because the clients, for those type of jobs, I mean, they're dealing with a pretty high budget. So it is a lot more stringent and a lot more locked down. And then you'll go through sort of a pre-production, and then do a shoot, and then go through post, and then get it out. So all is to say is that for each medium, there is sort of different processes, and that's why there's usually a different producer for each medium. So when that's handed over, that producer takes it. What should happen, and which I enforce is not enforce, but that I push for as a head of department, is that the producer needs to be involved right at the upfront, as opposed to like a handover where initially he sort of plays a consultant. He or she plays a consultant role, where it's like, okay, these are some dope ideas. We don't got money for that. Oh, we got all the money for that. You're good. When that's happening, as you know, Michael's kind of taking the client through like, oh, this is a great creative idea. This is so then like by the time that everyone hits go, everyone has had all the appropriate conversation. There's no sort of surprising, and that's kind of causes the smooth transitions throughout all the way to the end. So the day-to-day is really kind of being in the know what's happening even before the production has been officially given to you. It involves having appropriate meetings, hard meetings sometimes, knowing where to sort of kick up the intensity, in terms of like where this job is kind of going off the rails. Let's jump in a room, or I guess jump on a Zoom call now to sort of chat through, or a room. Or also understanding diplomacy, because oftentimes as a producer, you are managing people, but a lot of those stakeholders don't report directly into you. So it is a process. And Michael, that's a big part of your job as well, where it's just like you got to shepherd this thing through, but you're not the boss of X, So it is really understanding diplomacy and adaptability, and that's kind of the day-to-day.
Nice. Awesome. And so it's interesting because as much as we think of like creative industries and advertising, I'm hearing across all three of your responses that like soft skills, including like interpersonal, just like talking to people and everyday learning about, needs, problems, steering projects, managing expectations are certainly like large parts of what you do. It's not all like behind the screen creating dope content or, strategy, or working with dope clients. A lot of it is like, interpersonal skills and being able to like know again when to turn it up, when to bring it down, or, just managing the different types of personalities that you might encounter on the day-to-day.
Yeah, I'd say like the number one skill that I think will lead to success in the advertising industry is collaboration, the ability to work with other people. Because I think you've heard like it's a process that gets kicked off by the client, but it's like constant working with different groups and different folks to get it to that end product. And there's a lot of jumping in and jumping out. I think Neil and I are probably on different ends of the process. I very rarely worked with producers, but the projects in which the producers did come in early, and so I was interacting with them and they were collaborating early on in that creative process are the projects that were the most successful.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And I like
And
the
even,
word. Oh, go ahead, Michael.
I was just saying it's really interesting in talking about collaboration because
Mm.
when it comes to the account side, we need to be vigilant of the time that people are spending on their jobs. So you can't necessarily just assume collaboration means pulling every and anyone in the agency into the same room together. You have to be very diligent and smart about the way how you approach it. So that's where the interpersonal relationships really come into play, because you may not need this person on the account or on the project or on the business. We may need to ask them a favor to give you a potential ballpark or a potential assumption of strategy. That's kind of off the table, right? So even as the process is very laid out, it's also very nimble. And the skills you have, the connections you have with people, are what makes it successful.
Yeah, absolutely. So on that note of success, I like how, you just build the segues for me, but I'll start with you, Michael, because you're on screen. In like 1 or 2 sentences, what makes you successful in your role? What are some of the skills that you are able to finesse to make you successful? How do you know that at the end of the day, you are successful at what you do?
I think wit. I have to be quick on my feet and witty. Like it's consistent. Like you have to always be on in some ways in my role. As an account director, I am the hype man. So I need to be given as much energy as possible to the team, to the client, and not necessarily in a way that's fake or pretentious, but you understand that people work better when they are motivated, when they're feeling good about what's in front of them. So I always have to think about what's a witty comment I can have here to really lighten the mood. What's a smart way of responding to what a client is asking for that provides insight but also builds on your problem. You always have to have your mind about you and be able to like communicate that. And that leads to the other skill, I think, which is essential, which is the ability to communicate, the ability to just understand the nuances of communication when it comes to email, written, or even speaking, and also even in this new world of video communication. I think you have to give yourself the time to learn it, understand it, and be okay with constantly learning and adapting. And on that point about communication, the other thing is you're always communicating for someone else. It's never for yourself. So you have to be cognizant of that. And that's even when you're talking to clients or talking to peers or colleagues. You get information sometimes that's all over the place, and your job is to distill it and still be able to communicate it and keep the project moving forward. I've had client feedback that was just like, this ad is too thinky. And I'm like, okay, so what do you mean by thinky? Do you not want to use your brain to like? Let's dive into it. So you have to have the ability to like constantly be asking those questions and then taking that and like passing it along along the path. And I think, I don't know if you're ready for this yet, but I think like as Black people who code switch a lot, the ability to communicate to multiple audiences and understand the audience you're communicating to comes innately in a lot of ways. So I think it's really interesting how I had to unlearn that in some ways to relearn it for this industry and relearn it to make sure I show up in the industry versus the interpretation of myself.
Absolutely. There's so many nuances in communication, whether it be, deciphering what someone means, or even deciphering your own code switching and how to like circumvent that as well. So definitely a skill that I think everyone could use, but I could see how particularly in your role, it's one of the things that makes you incredibly successful. Neil, let me pose this to you. What makes you successful at what you do? What are some of the cues, both in yourself and maybe external cues that you use to recognize that like, yes, this is why I'm successful. These are the skills that I'm leveraging daily to do this. And this is how I know that I'm great at what I do, or that this is a role for me.
Yeah, I think, and this is going to be different for everyone, of course, so I can only speak for myself, but I mean, as a producer, the biggest thing for me was stress management and pressure management. I think our role is very sort of tied into tangibility. So a lot of the times up until that point in the process, like we're kind of all conceptualizing. Client is conceptualizing, creative is conceptualizing, and it's all about like, okay, this could work, this could that, but it is, and that is a huge piece of it, a huge piece. But then the at the point of client says thumbs up to creative, thumbs up to budget even, then the producer has a lot of accountability, even though like Michael's role and the account person's role is to sort of manage client and manage the overall project, because it's tied, that portion is tied into tangibility. If there's something that goes wrong from a production standpoint, they are looking at you as the producer, you know what I mean? Even though Michael's the one who has to tell the client, it is a lot of pressure. So stress management and how you deal with stress effectively, as in like, if something happens, am I reacting to my stress or reacting to the problem? So I think that's a key thing. And adaptability is something that I had to learn. I think it's extremely important. I think as producers, our role is to plan, is to structure. But I think what sets you apart from, understanding what process is and being a good producer is that understanding process, but things are always going to change. How do you adapt and then keep the project going? Absolutely. And that's something that's all about like, okay, how do I be comfortable with the uncomfortable? Because change is going to happen. There's like, even if there's a smooth job, I'm kind of like, for real? That was it. Like, I'm almost like, no, we got to. So then you're ready for it, and you're not dealing with such a level of stress because your plan didn't go exactly as you wanted Absolutely. It to go.
Yeah. For all of us.
So those two things.
Nice. Us type A people watching will appreciate that. And Chantaie, I'd love to pose this question to you as a strategist. What makes you successful at what you do? What, soft skills or hard skills do you bring to the table that, keep you through consistently day to day?
Yeah, I think the primary thing that makes a good strategist it's two things. It's the ability to take a lot of information and distill it down and simplify it to the thing that matters most. And then be able to take that thing that matters most and communicate it in a way that is compelling to the client and to our creative teams. So if you have a brilliant idea and a brilliant way of thinking of how to solve the problem, and it's so smart and so wonderful, but you can't help people understand it, it is almost useless. Mm-hmm. So that ability to really simplify, but then also communicate is really important, which is why, as a strategist, even though I'm not creating the final output, whatever it happens to be, I still consider myself a storyteller, because I have to take this idea and share it with folks in a way that makes sense. And usually the story I'm telling is the story of the consumer or the audience, and how this product or this thing or whatever it happens to be is going to make their life better in some way. Or it's going to add value to their life in some way. So it's very much about communication, simplification. And then of course, like I've said it already and I hate repeating myself, but like that ability to collaborate and work with folks. And, because sometimes you'll work with a creative team that has a beautiful, wonderful idea, but Neil will tell them it like they can't afford it. So how do we work together to bring that thing to life in a way that is affordable and makes sense and still delivers on what the consumer is going to need to be inspired and compelled to engage.
I love that, especially your note about simplicity. Like, I'm someone who, if I think I'd be the worst person to work with, because I want all the things, everything, and I also have no idea what I want, but I know exactly what I want at the same time. And so some of the greatest people that I've worked with have been able to like distill my thoughts into something that is simple and manageable for like myself, but also the end user as well. So shout out to all of you people that can do that.
I had a mentor who said to me once, strategy is the art of making decisions, because there are many solutions to any given problem. And really your job as a strategist is to choose one and then help the client understand why that's the right decision to make.
Nice. Shout out to your mentor. Um,
I've been lucky.
No, that's pretty solid. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sure for myself, but all the folks who are watching at home are wondering, like, how did these amazing people get into the roles that they're in right now? And I think what's interesting about you folks is you are at those like director, head, managerial roles. And I'm assuming you didn't just come into these roles, but you would have had to move up into the space that you're in. So I'll start with you, Neil. How did you get into, being the head of production? What does your pathway look like, knowing that everyone's pathway is unique? But I'm wondering if somebody might be able to identify with your story watching, or see themselves in the path that you're on.
Yeah, I think mine's may be a weird one, but I'm sure everyone else is also a little weird. Like for me, I went to Humber. I took multimedia design because I always there's that big creative side of me that's just like I like to shoot film. I like to do photography and et cetera, et cetera. Then I was like, maybe business is cool too. So then I switched to business. Oh no, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing in Humber. But one thing I really enjoyed, our advertising class. It was this instructor from P&G. He was a brand manager, and this is like before Mad Men. So like the concept of what even advertising was, I was just like, man, he looks like he's having the greatest time ever. You know what I mean? There was no reference, right? But I sort of parked that away. It was just in my head or whatever, but I didn't really act on it. One thing I really did enjoy was a part of oddly enough, a Black Caribbean organization at Humber, and what we would do with content and throw events. And I wanted to do that after school. So me and a bunch of folks, we launched a website called Live a Good Life, or Live a GL, and then we would also throw parties. And it was a fun thing, in my 20s thing to do. It got me into writing a little bit, and then we didn't get to I ain't a millionaire off of that, but I was able to sort of grow a decent readership, work with record labels for exclusive interviews and stuff like that. And it just gave me an interesting aspect into that world and cross collaboration. But then after a couple of years, I was like, I don't want to keep posting music. I don't want to post oh, this person had the newest song out. I don't just want to do postings for forever. Yeah. So I decided to shut down Live a GL, and I sort of just leveraged that. At that point, I was like, oh, that advertising thing that instructor was talking about. So I leveraged that experience. I tailored kind of the things that I learned from building a website into a strong enough brand that, businesses were taking notice, leveraged that, put that on a resume, applied every single place I could, but no one was giving no love until.
Can I jump in? What kind of places did you apply? Where were you applying? What roles did you see that you thought, yeah, let me apply for this one?
Oh, I didn't even understand what advertising was really. So it was more like anything that was marketing. Marketing was the term. I was like, oh, marketing, yeah. So I just applied everywhere. But then I was able to get a position at my first entry-level position at the small agency called Ariad, which is no longer with us, RIP. They gave me a chance. I was completely candid with them when I went on the interview, and my first entry-level role was online marketing coordinator. But the weird thing for them was they were like a publishing house trying to be an agency, so I don't even think they fully knew what the processes were, but they were learning, and they were a really great place to work. And then from then, my role sort of defined into a producer role. Okay. Then I was like, all right, I'm out. It was been great, but I'm gone. No negative reasons. But then TBWA was my first sort of global agency. But at that point, I kind of had an understanding of, okay, I think I'm kind of like a producer, so I can apply for this role. This is kind of what producing is like. And I sort of just kind of got my way in, and no clear path, but points. And I also a lot of I was blessed to be given people to give me a few chances, you know what I mean, because all that time took people throwing my resume in the purview, into the trash, right? So I was lucky enough that a few folks were like, all right, you know what, his resume seems interesting enough, let's give him a chance.
Nice. Was there anything that was particularly challenging about your path, into where you are right now? Maybe think of one thing that was a major hurdle you had to overcome, or maybe you're still experiencing this challenge.
I think from a context of a producer, but I think this context will probably roll out to all of us. But I can use this context is, as a producer, our role is to manage budgets. And then it's oftentimes that, like, you can tell an experience of a producer by the larger that budget grows. It's almost like, a digital producer who's junior, who's just doing banners and stuff like that. I mean, their budgets are really smaller, but they're building. And then then you're trusted, keyword trusted, to manage, the 500Ks, the $1 million budget, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I felt a bit of an apprehension to be given that trust. And it was always a sort of like, I have X level of experience, can I be given this opportunity? And even though I've shown, because it's not like I'm applying for a new job,
Mm-hmm.
I've shown sort of the proficiencies, it's kind of like, we're not sure. So I feel like that was a bit of there was a lot of knocking, even at places that I worked at, just to be given more responsibility. But I think the weird thing around that as well is I still kind of think about this. It's kind of like, is it the paranoia that we have as Black folks in this industry? Is this a sort of a racial bias? Is this a racial prejudice? Or is it just like, I wasn't ready? You know what I mean? I wasn't at the career, at the experience level where I could manage those campaigns. And it's something that I think it's the paranoia of being Black in a very small industry, is like, wait, was that? You know what I mean?
Yep, definitely. I love that you mentioned that. I mean, I work for NIA Center, the Black Arts Center, so I'm very lucky and privileged to work in a space where I don't have to experience that, but I have certainly felt that in certain positions, and my peers will let me know, like, is this a Black thing, or is it just literally I'm not ready for the opportunity? And we can kind of, not that we can never know, but it's so hard to know, and you can take up a lot of mental space and time that could have been used to further your career in other directions, just trying to figure out if
it's like, why am I still thinking about this? Maybe just keep it moving, but it's part and parcel,
Definitely. Chantaie, I would love to pose this question to you as well. Your path, I'm sure, is just as maybe fluid as Neil's. So what does your path look like, and how did you know that this is the role that you wanted to land in? And also, as a segue to that, any challenges that you faced that you were able to overcome, or that you're still facing as well?
Sure. So I think I mentioned earlier, but I started out my career as a journalist. I wanted to be a writer, ended up in journalism, got my master's in journalism, worked for the Globe and then for the Toronto Star. And then was a little burnt out and decided I was going to take a break. And I took that break in advertising. I got a role where they were looking for somebody with sort of the skills of a junior reporter, which is what I was at the time. And I was connected through somebody I'd worked with at the Globe to the then CEO of what was also then JWT. It's now Wunderman Thompson. It's gone through a number of different incarnations and versions of itself. And they took a risk on me, and I sort of took a risk. I got the job and then went home and sort of Googled what it meant to be a planner. And it was a risk. I'm glad. I think we're both glad we took. At the time back then, I used to say to people, I fell into my dream job and I didn't even know it was a thing. And so I think that's an important thing for Black folks, especially, to be exposed to, is just the opportunity and the roles that are out there that you wouldn't typically know or understand. A planner is not something that's well known. Even today, I've been doing it for almost 10 years, and I still have to explain to folks what I do for a living, and they're sort of like, okay, sure, whatever that is.
Whatever you say.
Yeah, exactly. They believe me. It's a thing. People pay me for it. So I got into planning, and then I was lucky enough to have a mentor. I had a great boss who was also a mentor, and then I had a mentor who was not my boss, but it was another VP planning, who saw that I was interested in brands, and so started giving me small projects to help build brands. And that's where I started to build out my expertise as a brand strategist specifically, and sort of grew my career in that way. And sort of every change I made from a career perspective was always about sort of expanding my skill set. So I wanted to know a bit more about research and a bit more about insight. So I moved into a role that helped me do brand strategy at an insights company. And then went back into the agency world as at a small consulting company within a larger agency, where I could focus entirely on building out brands for medium and larger businesses. So it was sort of a backdoor into the larger agency, Taxios agency. And so it was really about always making choices for myself to a certain extent, to build on a skill and get better at what I was doing. But it was also very much about, just like Neil, to a certain extent, it was luck, but more than luck, it was actually just being connected to the right people and making sure I maintained my relationships and connections to folks. Especially in advertising, I think we all know it's like who you know more than anything, which is why I'm such a huge advocate of like, if people reach out to me, I will try and connect you if I can, because mostly people take risks on people who are recommended to them or who they know in some way, or they have sort of that social trust. So I'm happy to like share my network and give that social trust, because I know it's so hard. I have younger folks come to me all the time and just like, how did you do it? What's the path I need to take exactly to get there? And it's like, I have the strangest background. And I think any planner you talk to will tell you that they have the strangest background. I used to be a photojournalist. I used to like own a baking shop. Like there are so many different folks. And I think the thing is, when it comes to strategy specifically, what you need is curiosity. So your background can be anything. And this is also why I'm a huge advocate of storytelling, because I think the reason I was able to like make the leaps and shifts that I have in my career is because I can tell a story behind it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm getting something that's saying my internet connection is unstable. So just tell me if
it's
I'm
okay.
frozen.
We can hear you. It's lovely that you bring up the note about like that social trust, particularly as Black people. It can be so hard to build that social capital to then build that social trust. And so your extension of like, you know, my network is, I mean, not my network is your network, but just being able to leverage your network to support other people, to just build that social capital for, you know, Black folks who are up and coming in this industry is huge, particularly knowing how important having a mentor was for you. Knowing that might set off a potential connection for a mentor for someone else is like amazing. So thank you for that. And so Michael, as account director, please tell us a little bit about, you know, what your pathway was into the role that you're in. I know that you probably didn't just exist and come up into this role, but it was a little bit of a process. So if there's any challenges that you experienced, share that with our audience, or perhaps challenges that you're currently experiencing.
Yeah, so I think my role and my path into this role has been quite interesting. My degree is in biology and psychology, and I have also an associate's degree in chemistry, math, and biology. And my intent was to do medicine. That was what I went to school for. That's what I was training for. That's what my family told me I should be doing. And during the process of doing that, I started working as a brand ambassador at an experiential marketing company, and fell in love with the idea of being able to influence people through communications and speaking to them. And even at that point in time, I didn't fully understand that this industry was a thing. I thought this was kind of like, why, how are you able to do this and sustain a full company doing this? This is kind of weird. And I eventually started, like, because of my communication skills, the company was, one of the companies was that they hired me full time and created a position for me, and I eventually worked up through the ranks of project manager and account manager, and during that process, the thing about experiential marketing, I think anyone in the ad world will tell you, is that you learn everything at once, and because of that, I think it really set a foundation for me where I was able to branch off and do multiple things. So I then went over to traditional advertising to kind of see what that was like, and even went over to international advertising and design and fabrication to see what that was like. So the path here to being kind of an account director is is unique. I don't think I've ever met an account director with the years of experiential marketing, traditional advertising, as well as design and fabrication experience that I have. And yeah, so I think the most challenging thing about this process for me was there's a bit of an assumption when it comes to assumption. There's a bit of a stereotype when it comes to Black men in particular and Black people about being aggressive and really like the negative influence, negative impacts of being assertive, and that's something that is completely against what a client servicing person is. So I think I had to battle that in some ways, and I kind of overcompensate for it. I mean, even to this day, I still overcompensate for it. With my emails and my communication, I am very aware of trying to be as positive as possible. I think I'm getting better at managing it and not being overly positive.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's something that I've actually had a boss tell me, oh, like, with that haircut, you look kind of mean right now. I'm like, okay, just shave my head off. I just shaved my hair off. I don't know what that means. I don't know how to take that. So yeah, that's been an interesting part of the journey for me as an account person specifically. There is a level of, similar to what Chantaie said, I had a lot of allies along the way. I had people who really saw the ability that I had to do the job that was in front of me, and to be able to be a smart business person as well as a relationship manager, and also project manager. And they really helped pull me up through a lot of the companies that I was at, and help expose me as well within those companies to kind of build that social credit. So yeah.
It's interesting that you brought up the note about being like overcompensating for the stereotype that exists for, you know, Black men and Black people just existing in these roles where you're very like front facing and like people pleasing and keeping the client happy. I once had a white manager tell me I was like super agreeable, and that's why she liked working with me, because like I just did everything, I did it really well and without asking any questions. And I was like, why am I like that? But it's because, you know, you're overcompensating. You don't want to be like the angry Black woman. So like everything with a smile, and, you know, having to check that and be like, you know, no, like there are parts of me that does have to be like, you know, people pleasing, keeping the client happy, but like overcorrecting in the wrong direction is certainly not helpful. So yeah, it's very interesting. And I'm just wondering what you would say to folks who are watching at home, who are in degrees that don't traditionally lead to roles that you're in, medicine, science, you know, whatever that may be. What would you say to them in terms of like supporting them in finding their ways into industries that aren't necessarily, you know, things that they're studying in more of a vocational sense?
I think start with building a bit of a network into that industry, because that will give you a sense of where you want to be and where you want to fall within the industry. So I think groups such as POCAM, People of Color in Advertising and Marketing on LinkedIn, that's a good group to join. And obviously if you're a Black person, and that network begins to unravel a few opportunities for you. And I think because everyone in this conference, I think at some point in time, you're the only Black person in the room, if not the only Black person in the agency. We all have a certain level of, I don't know, I'm speaking maybe out of turn, but I know I have a certain level of almost accountability and responsibility to ensure I'm not the only one when I leave the industry or when I'm out of the industry or what have you. So I'm actively, as much as possible, trying to provide mentorship, guidance, or what have you for anyone coming through. So I think find people within the industry, reach out to more than one person, as many people as you can, kind of get an understanding of what the industry is, what you're looking for, what you're gravitating towards, because you may want something that, or you may think you want something, or you're looking for something that may not be necessarily the best fit for you. You may be able to shine so much more in a different role within the same industry. So don't limit yourself to thinking that there's only one role for you, I think. And that kind of thinking in terms of don't limit yourself to thinking that the degree you have is the only role for you. Degrees give you the ability to learn, and you can continue to learn in multiple ways. So open your minds to that, and don't be afraid to take the step, I think.
Amazing. Thank you for that. And so on that note, the name of this session is Too Few for Too Long. Very often, I'm assuming each of you has understood what it feels like to be the only Black person or one of very, very few. And so I'm hoping we can talk a little bit about what your experience has been like, and being candid with some of the highlights and maybe the lowlights of, being, in the strong minority of industry that you hope to be in for, or have been in for quite some time and hope to, maybe continue to pursue. So Neil, I would love to start with you and just ask, generally speaking, what's it been like being a Black person combined with all the intersectionalities that make up your identity, working in your role, in your capacity as a producer? What's it been like for you, and what are some challenges that you've experienced that you've maybe overcome, or again, challenges that you might still currently be facing? Ooh, Neil, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, there we go. I think as a producer, I think to Michael's point, I really sort of resonate with the comment about, the balance of the stereotype of the Black man. And then how do the issue of how do you overcompensate? You find yourself overcompensating sometimes. As a producer, I think the typical stereotype when you're in the advertising agency is a person that's like, straight, like assertive, is always like, is the hard person, because it's all about getting that done and having hard conversations. And I felt, for me, there was a period of time that I just felt that I was just kind of overcompensating, just like Michael said, like, why do I have so much exclamation marks in my email? Like, that's unnecessary. So I think for me, it was managing the stereotype, but then finding over a period of time, sort of finding that confidence, finding my power, and being able to deal with people as my true self. And realizing that any stereotypes or biases that they may create over something that is a regular email, that is a problem that they need to deal with, not necessarily me, because I'm not that stereotype. So what are we even having that conversation about? So I think even that, like, that was if we're talking about challenges, that's something I needed to sort of get through. And it's not something that, like, oh, the second you're in, it's just like, oh, okay, I am who I am. Like, it's a process that I think you go from entry level to kind of where you're at, and you're like, you have an aha moment. And I think, just being a producer, oftentimes, like, you're the person. A good way to look at a producer is, like, from a production standpoint, they're the external representation. And what I mean by that is that, like, okay, if you now need to make a shoot, like, you are now sort of working with the production house, you're working with talent, you're working with photographers, you're hiring photographers. Like, so you kind of go out, get the right partners, bring them in, and make the concept happen. But oftentimes you're now not just dealing with potential biases from the inside of your agency, but the production industry in general. So oftentimes there was dealings with that, being on set. I mean, there's been a few times where I'm on set, and I'm the person that needs to manage the line producer, or needs to manage the overall set through the line producer or through the production company. And there'll be assumptions of me about my role. Like, oh, you're a PA. Oh, okay, there's a few times I had to, like, correct some people, you know what I mean? And it's like something that it's like, you wouldn't maybe make that assumption with other people.
Yep.
And it's those, like, microaggressions that you deal with that, again, sort of ultimately create a paranoia, until you find ways to almost, like, break that paranoia. And but it is something that does throw with the mind, for sure.
This it might be like a difficult question to answer, but, like, how long did it take for you to get to this point, from let's say, your first experiences on set to, how you are now, where you're able to like identify and also work within yourself and externally to, counter those microaggressions?
Yeah, I don't know if I had the exact aha moment, but it was definitely it's like 6, 7, you're like years where it's become routine, and then you get to a certain point, it's like, yo, what am I doing? Like, you know what I mean? But it's something that, and the worst thing about it, I don't know if I can speak to anyone here, is like when you naturally are a person that is, proud to be Black, has like strong sort of values, convictions around being Black and not ashamed of it. When you're starting out, there's almost like a guilt that you have, like, wait, why am I not this more? You know what I mean? And it takes that time to be like again, a period of time just to kind of get into yourself, get into your confidence. You are an alien in this world. And I find that, like, for me, I not only was me being Black a thing, but I was not of the culture, you know what I mean? So like me having conversations, and this is not even a negative thing, but it would be different I'm not talking about my cottage. I don't have a cottage, like, you know what I mean? And that's not shade. I'm just like, those type of conversations. I don't know who the Tragically Hip is. Like, I have no idea, you know what I mean? But like, I am trying to get myself familiar with an alien world, and that comes with like insecurities. Definitely. But then it's like, okay, now I can speak this language in this alien world. I'm building that confidence a little bit more, you know? And I think after that, it's kind of like you get to a point that takes a while that you can be like, well, no, this is who I am. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure it's also challenging because working in industry or creative industries, a lot of the cultural markers are markers that we don't identify with. Like,
exactly.
Things like, we're looking for cottage country vibes. Okay, I'm not really sure what that is. Or, you know, reference points that we Black folks just might not identify with, but some might do, identify with Tragically Hip. But working to create, things that speak to people when you don't speak that language, I'm sure it can be challenging. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I don't even mean to be like, okay, like, because the last thing I want to do is make the Black experience a monolith. But so that was just in reference to me personally and my cultural fit, where I was like, oh, for me personally, Black it's its own category of experiences, but then the cultural bit is also like, whoa, okay, so I can't even like respond to you when you make references. I can't even respond to you if there's certain things that you're talking about. I'm just like,
the dominant culture.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is about, like, to the point where we're all talking about soft skills and personability, and sometimes it is about, like, if you want to get close to someone, it's that 5 minutes before that meeting starts, where you are having those sort of light conversations and connecting with them and stuff like that. So it's very important, and I think finding ways to be able to do that, but still not be completely understanding of the situation, I think was really tricky in the beginning.
Definitely. And Chantaie, what about you? What are, some things that have defined your experience as a Black person working within advertising and creative industries, things that you are, very proud of, and things that you maybe, are not representational of the industry that you want to work in? And if these are, legacies of the past when you're coming up, share, but they also might be things that you're currently going through as well.
Yeah, I would say that I think the most challenging thing for me is the intersection of my gender and my race, especially in a field, specifically planning, where trust is really important. The strategy director is often expected to be the like, quote unquote smartest person in the room. People turn to you and expect you to have answers and a point of view and perspective, but that also requires that they trust you. And even like, I'm like fairly senior in my role and experience, but I constantly have to prove myself. Especially when I'm starting with a new client, I'll walk into the room and you can see that pause of like, this is the person you're putting in charge of our multi-million-dollar account, all of the strategy, this Black woman. So, and my response to it is always, first of all, I always see it, that pause, that moment when the client is like, but my response to it is to smile. what are you doing here? I smile, I shake their hands, and I do the work of proving myself. It is very irritating to have to constantly do that. And I have the question that Neil talks about all the time, where I'm like, is this about my gender or my race? And my answer to it is almost always probably a little bit of both. I'll never know fully, but I'm going to do my job. Are we allowed to swear?
Yeah, go ahead. Denise will bleep it out.
Okay. Okay. I'm fucking awesome at my job. And so I come into the room knowing that, and that makes it easier.
Yeah.
But when I started out in this field and industry, I didn't know what I was doing, so I wasn't fucking awesome at my job. So there was a lot of learning, and I think I'm lucky in that I'm naturally curious. I used to be a journalist, so I spent a lot of my life asking questions, and I'm not afraid to ask questions and quote unquote look dumb because I know I'm smart. And so that I come with that energy all the time.
Yeah.
And that idea of being like the aggressive or angry Black woman, I think I just accepted a long time ago I'm fucking angry. Like the world is a messy, awful place for Black people, and especially Black women. So if you think I'm aggressive, that's fine. I'm going to make you a lot of money if you trust me, or I'm going to help your company make a lot of money if you trust me. And if you don't, that's your loss.
Amazing.
And that's sort of the energy I bring to the work that I do.
And so, Michael, I'll move.
Sorry.
That's okay. It's totally fine. We're all adults here. What does the outlook look like for you in terms of, the creative industry and advertising? Like, where do you see it going, particularly in including more voices that are wholly diverse and, allowing more people, particularly Black people, to come in and exist in these roles? Where do you see it going? Do you see, tides changing, or is it just like a stagnant pool of water that you're like, it's all smoke and mirrors, nothing's really happening?
So I wrote this in a brief about 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. I said inclusion is inevitable. Mm-hmm. I think we're at a place, not only in history, not only because of the recent awareness of anti-Black racism, but just in general, the world is a lot more global. A lot of the interactions you have aren't just based on your perspective, but it's based on perspectives outside of you. And the products that are appealing to people, the products that are putting out there need to respond to that as well. Mm-hmm. So you live in a world where all the products, all the businesses are going in a direction where they need to reach people they've never reached before and tell stories they've never been able to tell before. And I don't think there's an option for you to have a successful business, but for it to be inclusive. There are problems that are going to occur, there are problems that are going to come up that the same white man who solved it 50 years ago can't solve it now. Like, it's just not possible. So I think the outlook for me, I think is positive. We're going to be going in the right trajectory. I don't think there's a choice. Is it going to be easy? I don't think so. Mm-hmm. Is it going to be something that happens in a year? I don't think so. But I definitely think we're taking the right steps in the right direction. There's a power, and this is kind of related to what my experience in advertising and what I had to learn, is that my voice has power and my experience has power because it's something that the people I'm speaking to have never seen, have never heard. My point of view is one that they're not familiar with, that they can't necessarily relate to, and that difference brings power to the table. And I think that's something that as Black people we can really lean into. There are stories that we need to start telling in advertising. We can't have another white guy driving a car for a car ad. Like, no, they're Black people who enjoy vehicles just as much in different ways and have bigger stories that are associated with vehicle brands than what's being portrayed. We can't necessarily have another heteronormative situation where a guy is trying to fix plumbing. Like, that's not necessarily a story that relates to the general population anymore. It's been told, it's been done. In advertising, we have this saying which we say, we want to break through the clutter. And that's a way of just saying, let's try to do something that captures attention and pulls people in differently. And I think the stories from us Black people are going to do that. The perspectives that we bring to the table are going to do that. We're going to make advertising agencies more competitive if they're willing to accept us.
Can I just reinforce that and plus one, that idea of our superpower, the magic that we bring to any room is our perspective, and the fact that we don't know who Tragically Hip is and everyone else in the room does, but we do know who Nas is, you know, like if like we're going to bring something that is magical, and I don't want to say magical, but like that is powerful and different, and it is a superpower. And so I just want to plus one what Michael just said around that.
You know, I also just want to close this off and just say thank you to you, Neil, to you, Michael, to you, Chantaie. I think as people have been watching, they're seeing the sun set in all of our windows, and it's gotten progressively darker. So, you know, the times are ticking, and I wish I could keep you all for a little bit longer, but, you know, it's now officially nighttime, and I think we need to peace out. So thank you all for being here.